morning everyone. In our last video we looked at 5 tips that we learned while bike touring in Australia. Now that video got a great response and really got some conversation going. So here are 5 more tips and tricks for bike touring in Australia with a couple of your suggestions thrown in too. Alright guys, before we get into this one, I just need to let you know that 60% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed. So please consider hitting that button, especially if you're into bike touring and bike packing and maybe want to learn a thing or two. Alright, so let's get into it. Now this one came up in the comments quite a lot. And the reason we never originally added it is because we see this as like more of a general rule for bike touring, not just Australia specific. But having said that, it is very important to remember this, especially in Australia. Now, a simple example of how we implemented this rule was when we were riding across the Nullarbor. Now, we knew we'd get a water refill every 2 days. So we made sure we carried enough for those 2 days, plus a big old 5-litre jug on Bonnie's rear rack that acted as the emergency reserve. Now, 2 days isn't very long in the grand scheme of things, and especially in Australia, but it's a simple example of how to put that rule to work. So I originally heard about this one from a guy who was riding across Uzbekistan in the summer. But it's definitely relevant to Australia. The summer sun is at its most severe in the middle of the day. And as such, that's the most brutal time to be riding. A good way to get around this is to set off really early in the morning and then stop for a few hours in the middle of the day to have a break before setting off again in the late afternoon. Now this little break in the middle of the day is a great time to catch up on some bike maintenance, or cook some food, or just have a little siesta. I've even heard of people getting up super early, getting all their riding done in the morning, and then just finishing at lunchtime. Or you could go the other way and ride overnight. Now obviously this carries its own risks, but it's definitely an option worth considering. The road train, a true Aussie icon. Whenever there's discussion about bike touring in Australia, inevitably the topic of road trains comes up. Whenever we tell anyone about our Nullarbor crossing, 90% of the time their first question is, how were the road trains? And the truth is, the road trains were fine. They're professional drivers. This is their livelihood, and they don't want to do anything stupid that's going to jeopardize that. In general, I would say they're the best drivers out there, and you're much more likely to have an issue with a first-time grey nomad who hasn't figured out how big their caravan is yet. However, it's still important to be wary of these highway behemoths. If you've got a road train coming up behind you and there's traffic coming the opposite way in the other lane, get off the road. Now usually road trains have always overtaken us in a very considerate manner. They've always given us plenty of space. But if they've got nowhere to go, you need to get out the way. And if it's a livestock truck, just get out the way anyway. When they swerve to one side, all the cattle inside run to that side, and then they run back, and there's a chance they can actually flip the trailer. So those drivers are very reluctant to be swerving about. So just get off the road. In fact, if there's ever any doubt whatsoever, just get off the road. The humble bungee, or Occy Straps, as you call them in Australia. Now we all know how handy these are, and I didn't add them to this video to give you any secret uses for them or special tricks or anything like that, but in fact to highlight an issue we've had, which is UV damage. Now ever since we left Perth, Bonnie has used bungees to secure the load on her rear rack, and I have lost count of how many of those things we have been through. Leaving them out all day in the hot Australian sun just causes them to perish. They just fall apart. So I prefer to use Velo straps, Vol straps, whatever you want to call them. They're a silicone strap, but they're impregnated with some sort of treatment that makes them UV resistant. Yes, they're more expensive, but for me it's been worth it. They really have been rock solid. So I guess this point's just really a placeholder for UV damage, which can be a real hazard to your equipment if you don't protect it. My front bag, which was brand new when we left Victoria, is now completely bleached from the sun, which sort of shows you the kind of damage it can do, which includes things like your tent. So I guess if you're going to use bungees, make sure you have a few spare. Phone service in Australia can be real spotty. Now it's getting better, and there's definitely a lot more coverage than there was, but it can still be an issue at times. Many remote parts of Australia still have zero reception whatsoever, so there are a few things to consider before going bush. Make sure people know where you're going, and let them know how long you're going to be out there and how long it's going to take you to get through. If you get back late, or you don't turn up where you're meant to be at the time you told them, they'll know to send help. And if going into remote areas is something you do a lot, maybe consider getting a GPS tracker, like a Spot or a Garmin InReach or something like that. They allow anyone who has the tracking link to track your movements and see where you are, and they also have an SOS button you can hit to call emergency services should you need them. And on a lighter note, don't forget to get your emails sorted and reply to your Facebook messages. Make sure all your social media is in order before you go off the beaten track. Alright guys, that's it for today. Hopefully you found something of value in there. As usual, hit the like button, subscribe if you want more, and we'll see you next time.